Thanks a lot for the organizer for this very nice conference and the invitation. So I am a theoretical physicist from CNRS and ENS de Lyon. So I will talk you about some application of rare event algorithm and machine learning in order to predict extreme heat waves in climate dynamics. So please interrupt me and ask me questions if you wish. So Manon asked me to make an introduction about some general aspects of machine learning related to climate dynamics. So I will do this, and then I will talk about my own work.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Okay, so the first key idea is that the Earth is the physical systems which is certainly the most observed one in the world. So here you can just, for the sake of the illustration, you can see the ensemble of developed Earth observation satellites by ESA, and here you also see a picture just to illustrate that there is more than just satellite. There are many other kinds of observation of the atmosphere, the ocean, the land, and so on. And so there is a huge amount of data which is growing extremely fast. And so from this, it might be natural to expect a big role of data in the future. And so here I show you another aspects of this data increase. Here you see the examples of a picture from ECMWF. ECMWF is the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast. So it basically runs the weather simulation for Europe, and those data are used all over the world. And so you can see the years here. You can see here the model resolution, and you can see here two kinds of curves. So there is the sustained performance in the teraflops per second, and you have also the archive size. So you have the power of the computer that are used, and also in blue you have the amount of data which is generated and stored. So these data are not exactly the same as the one in the first figure. They contain both the observation, but they contain also the data produced by the model themselves. And you can see here the resolution of the model. And so it's this is you see this is here it's an exponential increase because you see a straight line here, and this is a log scale. So the point is that those data are not used directly. I mean, they could be used directly for some application, but for most of applications, they are not used directly. So they are used in conjunction with the physical models. So for instance, here on this picture, you can see what has been produced by something like a weather model, which is constantly doing what is called reanalysis and data assimilation. So data assimilation means that you have the physical model, and the physical model is constantly learning what is the initial condition which is the closest according to the observation in the past. And so it means that what you see here, it's the solution of the solution of a physical model, but it's more than that. I mean, constantly it gathers the data and it uses it. And actually, the resolution of the model is at a scale which is much smaller than the actual resolution of the observation. And so you have much more data here than you have in the observation. And so this is something very important to understand. And then once this has been done, a posteriori, the weather service makes what is called a reanalysis, which is the best approximation of the reality based on both the physical model and the observation. So you see that this reanalysis is something like a very clever machine learning procedure to mix the physics with the observation. And so it's a very old thing. So it is used for weather systems for a very long time. So I will describe you the figure itself from a physical point of view a bit later on. So you have the atmosphere, as I was showing before, but you also have the ocean. And so the ocean is just like just the same. So here you see the data from the surface flow over the ocean. And so this is produced also with a physical model using data assimilation. And so this produces a huge range of data. Then you can ask, related to this data, can it be used to make machine learning? And so naively, some people think that we will just use the data to make the prediction. Actually, this is not the way people think about this in the field. And so here you see a figure that comes from a roadmap for the next 10 years at ECMWF, and where they explain how they want to use machine learning. So here you see you have the observation, you have the data assimilation I just explained you before, you have a numerical weather forecast, and you have the post-processing, which is a way to use the output of the models and to make actual prediction with them. And so here, in each of these boxes, you have one machine learning use and application. And so you see that you have plenty of them. So for instance, you have emulation of gravity wave drags. So it is something like emulation of some physical process that are not inside the model and that we want to put on top of the model. You have bias correction, you have many kinds of things. And so then it's when you speak of machine learning related to climate or weather forecast, you should be aware that there are many, many different applications. Myself, afterwards, I will show you something which is not in this graph, which is something else, which is the use of machine learning a posteriori to understand the models. And so what I show you here is true for the weather models, but it is also true for the climate models with very small adjustment in what is done and how the data is used. So I will skip this one. So you see that they have plans. It's really big science. It's not the kinds of science that people like us are doing. It's organized, it's funded with amounts of money which are huge. Now I want to show you just one application. It is my application. I will discuss a bit more this application later on the talk. So here first you see, I describe the picture. So you see two maps. So the colors show you the surface temperature. And so it's a surface temperature anomaly, meaning that the average has been subtracted. So you have some anomaly of temperature that fluctuates between -10 and +10 degrees. And so you see a map of the North Hemisphere, but actually the model that produces this is a global model. And so you see a hot area and cold area, which corresponds to anticyclonic and cyclonic situation. And so the lines is a second field, a second map, which is called the 500 hectopascal geopotential height. So it's something that measures the height of the geopotential in the middle of the troposphere at a few kilometers of altitude. So if you don't know what is the geopotential height, just think about it as something like the pressure or something like that. It is strongly correlated with the pressure, the kinds of map you see for weather forecast. And so here, it is actually also an anomaly, meaning that the average has been subtracted. And so you see here that when you have lines like this, there is an anticyclonic anomaly. And when you have dashed lines, you have cyclonic anomalies. So this is a map that shows you at one day a snapshot of the weather situation with just two fields. Actually, the weather model or the climate model have much more fields, but those two fields are thought to be very characteristic of the large-scale patterns. And so here, the question I want to ask is, if I have many of these data and I know what happened in the future, I would like to be able to predict whether there will be an heat wave or an extreme heat wave toward some duration ahead of this map. So for instance, I see this map today. I want to predict if there will be an heat wave starting within 3 days or within 10 days or within 15 days. So this will be my question. And so you see, it's just then a classification problem. I have this map. It's supervised. I know whether the heat waves occur or not. So from this map, I have the map and 0 and 1s. I have two classes. And then I want to be able to learn from the observation data this classification problem. And so this is just one example among others. Just to tell you the orders of magnitude, here we will use, for instance, 1,000 years of the output of a model. And so the model has 90 days per year, 8 maps per day. So we have about 700,000 maps. Actually, many of them are correlated. So you should think of about 100,000 uncorrelated maps, something like that. So this amount of data is not very large, as you will see afterward. And so those are the resolution at which the maps is output from this model. The other model has a slightly finer resolution. And so this is the classification problem. So you have X, which is one of this map or both of them. You have them at all time t, and then you compute y of t, which is will be my definition of a heat wave. So here I compute the average of the temperature over an area. For instance, I will compute the temperature average over Europe or over France or over Japan or whatever. So this is this first integral here and a spatial average. And then I make also a temporal average. I mean, the heat waves that matter are the heat waves that last long. So here I average during d days. D is the duration of the heat wave I want to study. And then there is a delay, tau. And so I want to study, knowing the field today, if there will be an heat wave that will start in tau days and last for d days. Okay, so this variable y has a distribution. And so I will study extreme heat waves. So I will look at if y of t is larger than a, and a is a threshold that I will fix a priori. For instance, I will use a equal a5, which is the threshold that corresponds to the 5% most extreme events. Or I will study the same thing with a 2.5, which are the 2.5% most extreme events, and so on and so forth. And so if y is larger than a, z is equal to 1, otherwise z is equal to 0. So I have a classification problem. I know the couples x and z, and I want to be able to predict whether a heat wave occur or not. And so I just give you a key point that it will be one of my conclusions, but it's usually valid in climate problems. So the key idea here is that we will nearly always be in a regime of lack of data. As you were seeing, the numbers of maps is very small. And so here you can see a prediction skill, a score for the prediction. See, this is the variable tau, the days ahead of the starting of the heat waves. And you see here the quality of the prediction. I will explain you better afterwards. But now I just want to compare the green curves, the three curves here, the green, orange, and blue. And so the green use 1,000 years of data to make the training and the test. And the second one, 200 years of data. And the third one, 100 years of data. And so you clearly see that it has not converged. I mean, probably if we would have 10,000 years of data, it would be much better. And so we are in a regime of a lack of data. And if you think of real data for the real Earth, these kinds of data, we only have something like 40 years of observation of these types if we want good quality data, or maybe 70 years if we are ready to use less quality data. And so I think this is something which is generally true in this field, that not for all applications, but for most applications, we are in a regime where the data is very scarce. Okay, so the conclusion for this introduction is that, well, it is the most observed systems, which is an exponentially growing data set. But for the application I have in mind, you will not use directly this application. You would rather use, couple it with the weather and the climate models. So then for this, machine learning and deep neural networks enter in many different ways for both weather forecast and climate dynamics. And for many of these problems, machine learning should be performed in a regime of a lack of data. So this is very important to understand. Okay, now I will make a second introduction, this time to the problem of studying climate extremes and rare event algorithm. So here you see a picture from the annual death by major climate-related disaster by some agency of the UN. And so you see during the last 20 years or so. And so you see that there were mainly three major events. So one was the Western European heat waves, where we had 70,000 people dying in 2003. There was a big cyclone in Myanmar, and there was the Russian heat waves in 2010. So it means that most of the impact of the extreme events are due to just a few extreme events, and they are quite different in terms of nature and where they occur and so on and so forth. So if you look at a single of these events, they have a return time which is very long, something like 100 years or 1,000 years or 10,000 of years. So it means that these events are extremely rare, each of them. But there are many kinds of them, and so that's why we see a lot of them always, and we have seen many of them this summer. And so that's why we need to study first the most extreme events, not just extreme events, and we need to study some events which are extremely rare from the point of view of the dynamics of the model. And so this is really a very serious scientific challenge. I will skip a few slides. And so we have three key problems here in the study of these climate extreme events. So the first problem is that the historical records are way too short. As I explained before, we have 70 years of data. The heat waves over Europe was estimated to have a return time in the pre-industrial climate, something between 500 years and 10,000 years. So you see that the range is huge, so we don't know exactly. So it means that it's an event that was never observed before. And so we cannot really count on historical records to study these extreme events. So then we should use the physical model, the climate models. So they are wonderful tools, but they still have biases. And so we are making progress, including using machine learning, but there's still a lot of work. And the point is that the more precise they are, the more computationally costly they are. And then, because they are too rare, the most extreme events cannot be computed using direct numerical simulation. Actually, if you run this climate model, it's a huge cost. If you want to run them 1,000 years, it's already a huge effort. One can do that, but it's on the big supercomputers. And so if you want many of these events, you really need to do something else. And so the practical question here is how to sample the probability and the dynamics of rare events in this complex model. And this is the connection with, one of the connection with this week discussion. The answer we will give is to use a rare event algorithm. And so the question here could be stated like this: how to study a 10,000-year heat wave with a 200-year simulation. And so we will use rare event algorithm. Probably you know that those are used a lot in statistical mechanics and in many other fields. So the basic idea comes from Kahn and Harris, for instance, in 1953. So there have been many developments in statistical mechanics, sometimes for equilibrium problems, sometimes for dynamical problems, like the one I am discussing today. And there are lots of people working in the applied mathematics community in order to develop these kinds of application. So there are a few people applying this to climate problems. So for instance, Jonathan Weir at NYU and Dorian Abbott at Chicago University, or Rainer Grauer and Tobias Grafke for turbulence problems. Eric van der Deyden, we work together, our group and Lyon and so on. But it's really a very small community so far. So the point is how to compute an extremely rare trajectory. So you start, so here for this sketch, I have two sets, set A. For instance, the set A would be one attractor of a multi-stable dynamics. A set B, the set B could be another attractor of a multi-stable dynamics. But the set A could also be just the typical fluctuation of the systems, the part of the phase space where the system is typical behavior, and the set B could be just the set where you have extreme events, for instance. So for instance, I can define the set B as the set that corresponds to extreme heat waves. Then we start from X, and the point is to be able to predict the trajectory that will go to B and their probability. So the point is that usually, most of the times, the trajectory that starts from X will end in A, just because A is the current attractor of the system, or because it is the set of typical states of the system. So in application of rare event algorithm, the probability to reach B may be 10 to the minus 3, but it may be up to 10 to the minus 20. I mean, if you sometimes it's possible to do these kinds of things. So we use several kinds of rare event algorithm. There is a whole family. Here I just describe one of them, which is the adaptive multi-level splitting, mainly because it's very efficient for some application, and also because it's very easy to explain it pedagogically. So you have these two sets A and B. So you start an ensemble of trajectory from X. So typically the ensemble is you have n trajectory. N can be 100 and 1,000 or something like that, or 10,000. Here for the sketch, I have only 3 trajectories. So you run 3 trajectories, the 3 blue trajectory. Then you should measure how good this trajectory were in going towards B. And so for this, you have to define a function Q here, which is called the score function. And what you see here are some level lines of the score function in dashed. And so those level lines correspond to the best value achieved by these 3 trajectories. Then what we will do is to remove the trajectory 1, which is the worst, and produce a new trajectory which has taken its initial condition from one of the others. So for instance, here the trajectory 2 has been selected between all the other trajectory, and a new purple trajectory is drawn using the initial condition here, which is on the same level line as the one that was reached by the trajectory 1. If you do the maths of this, you see that the second set, you can consider it as having a probability P, which is n-1 divided by n. You have selected n-1 trajectory among n, and you can propagate this. The algorithm is made for that, and then you can use this algorithm iteratively. So after k iteration, you finally push your n trajectory towards the attractor B in a very efficient way, and you can estimate the probability to go from X to B before coming back to 8. So this was proposed by Arnaud Guyader and Frédéric Serroux, and it has been studied a lot by Tony Lelièvre and many people working with him, and we have used it ourselves in many applications. So I want to show you now some application of this relevant algorithm to study extreme heat waves. So here most of the work, the heavy technical part with the climate model has been done by Francesco Ragone. Francesco is now at the Belgium Meteorological Agency in Brussels. Okay, so I come back to my movie. Now I want to describe it a bit more in terms of the dynamics and the physics. So what you see here are is the speed of the wind on the top of the troposphere. So it is at a height of about 10 kilometers. And so the red band here corresponds to wind which have speeds of about 30 to 40 meters per second. So it's very fast. And as you can see, it is not just fast, but it is also a jet. A jet in fluid mechanics means that it is localized sharply along some lines. So this jet is called the jet stream, and it goes around the planet. And so here you have inside, in this part, you have an anticyclone. Here you have a cyclone, and you see that the meander of this jet actually corresponds to the weather we have at mid-latitude. So this jet is a current structure which is always present at the planetary scale. There are two of them, one in each hemisphere. And so this is the structure which is responsible for mainly for mid-latitude weather. So what will be an heat wave? An heat wave will be a moment of time for which this jet, for some reason, will stop to have its mean motion as eastward and will become stationary in the reference frame of the planet. Then you can have a situation, an anticyclonic situation like this one here, but if it remains blocked for a very long time over a period, then the heat can increase, there are positive feedbacks, and it can last much longer than it usually lasts. And so this is, in word, the basic mechanism for producing heat waves. So we have studied this using one climate model, actually several climate models. So PLASIM is a simple model which has the good physics, and CSM is one of the best climate models that are used worldwide, for instance, in order to make the CMIP experiment for IPCC. And so here you see a map for the North Hemisphere, just like the map I showed before. Here the difference is that the projection is different. So you see both the temperature and the geopotential height. And so you see a movie here actually during heat waves over Europe. And so what you can see is that here, most of the times, it is hotter than usual. And I will describe this a bit more later on. So I define the extreme heat waves just as I explained before. So I will be looking at this observable. And then with this observable, we will look at the tail of the distribution and define this as a heat wave. So I don't, actually we have used another relevant algorithm. I will not describe it. It's called the cloning algorithm. It is a kind of algorithm like the one discussed in the book of Delmoral and used by Delmoral and Garnier, but it is specially suited to adapt it to compute large deviation. But I just show you the result for now, because today I want to focus on the methodology and on the learning algorithm. And so you see here a curve for, on this axis you have the return time. It's the average time you have to wait before seeing a heat wave. And here you have the amplitude of the heat wave. So for instance, you can read this graph like this. If you want to understand what is the decadal heat waves, so you read 10 years here and you see that the decadal heat waves has an amplitude which is 1.7 degrees, or the millennium heat waves, and you can read its amplitude. And so it's typically the kinds of curves which is needed in order for risk management, either by the public company or the insurance company. And so with the climate model, we run it 1,000 years, we make the black curve. And so you see that we were able to estimate these return times, and you have huge fluctuation here because, for instance, for this point, we have just one observation with 1,000 years. But with the rare event algorithm, with the same numerical cost, we were able to make the red curve. And so it shows that a fixed numerical cost, we can study events which are several orders of magnitude more rare with this rare event algorithm than with the direct use of the model. And here, this is another graph I will not discuss. Here, it's just, now if you fix the amplitude, here what you see is the numbers of observed heat waves at a fixed numerical cost. So it gives us a very efficient way to study this extreme event. So I will not have time to discuss the physics today. I will directly skip, maybe I will come back afterward, but now I want to directly skip to the machine learning problem. And so here we just want to predict these heat waves from data. Here we just use a deep neural network for the classification problem I described you before. And so we have these maps, as I already explained. We have a classification problem. And from this map, we want to predict whether there is a heat waves or not. And so we use off-the-shelf deep neural networks. So for instance, here we use CNN. You can see the architecture. So we use these two maps at the as a data set, and we want to predict whether the heat waves occur or not. So it's an example of supervised learning. So because the positive events are very rare, I mean, they are 5% of the data, or 2.5% of the data, or 1% of the data, we use undersampling to deal with a class imbalance. And we also use transfer learning between the return levels. First training for less rare events, and progressively transferring the train model to rare event for which we have less data. And so you can see here an example of the quality of the prediction. So we divide between training and testing sets. And so you can see here as a function of the temporal shift tau, the Mathieu correlation coefficient for this prediction. And you see that if we look at a heat wave that starts today and will last 14 days, so it's a prediction during the 14 next days, then we have a Mathieu correlation coefficient, which is not excellent, but which gives you a prediction which is very interesting. And so then you can see how these curves evolve when the temporal shift progress. And it's harder and harder to actually predict the heat waves, which is expected actually because of the chaotic nature of the dynamic. And you see three curves which correspond to the free level, 5%, 2.5%, and 1.25%. So we have very interesting prediction capabilities up to 15 days. Actually, a key point I want to stress is that what we want to do is a probabilistic prediction of a probabilistic classification. What I mean by that is that when you have a picture with a cat and a dog, it is a cat or a dog. So even if it is for sure one or the other. So even if your prediction is, you might call it probabilistic because you have error and you compute a probability, what you compute is the prediction to have 0 or 1. Here for us it's different because the relation between the field and the classification is itself probabilistic because there are noise, because the dynamic is chaotic and so on and so forth. So you are not predicting whether you have heat waves, you want to really predict the probability to have a heat wave. And so then we use the Matthews correlation coefficient is not really adapted to that. So we use a logarithmic score, and then we just adapted in order such that the score is 0 if the prediction is made according to the climatology, meaning without using the information of the data, and it is 1 for a perfect prediction. And so this plot, for instance, the one I have shown you already in the introduction, is has this prediction skill score, this normalized and positive oriented log score. And so you see here again that as a function of the numbers of days ahead, we have quite good prediction using 1,000 years of data. And this was the point of this plot in the introduction, is that this has really not converged in terms of amount of data. So the observation data set is the actual one for the Earth is way too small for good machine learning prediction directly. So we will have to use it in conjunction with model as we try to do here. So another way to see that we are missing data is the fact that in order to have our best prediction, we are using not all the data over the globe or even over the hemisphere. We are using the data only on a small part of it that you can see here, which is the North Atlantic and Europe, in order to predict heat waves over France. You see that in principle we would have interest to use the field at a larger scale, but if we use the field at a larger scale, as we have tried here, you see that the prediction skill is lower. So it means that if we really want to use all the information, we don't have enough data to make sense of it, for the neural network to make sense of it. And actually this is optimal because you see that if you restrict further the size with a small area, then it is worse than if we use an intermediate size area. So this is another way to see that we are in a regime of lack of data. The best performance is obtained for an area of an intermediate size. So the conclusion for this part is that we make a prediction of heat waves. It is an example of a probabilistic classification problem. So we use just off-the-shelf CNN algorithm adapted to this situation with a few adaptations. So the 2 week heat waves can be efficiently predicted up to 15 days ahead. And so we are clearly in a regime of lack of data. And so this is my main point. I mean, we have a rare event algorithm, which is here to produce more data. And we have these machine learning tools, which are very efficient, but that need to have more data. And so this introduces the following of my talk. What we really want to do is to be able to couple both. I mean, to couple the rare event algorithm with the machine learning. We will use the rare event algorithm to improve the data set, especially to improve the data set about the rare event we're interested in, to have a better machine learning. And as I will explain you now, it is a two-way coupling. I mean, to have the machine learning will also help us to improve the rare event algorithm. I want to explain you this in this for the AMS algorithm. As I told you, we need a score function here. So as you may guess, this score function tells you whether you go in the good direction. But it is not clear at all what should be the good direction. And actually, the score function is a key of the relevant algorithm. So if you have a good score function, the algorithm works wonderfully well. If you don't have a good score function, then the algorithm doesn't work at all. So it's exactly the same problem as the one that was discussed by Tony this morning. If you have a good reaction coordinate, you can easily bias your dynamics. If you don't know it, it is much more tricky. So here there is one more aspect, is that the optimal score function is known mathematically. It is called the commuter function. And so this is the main point. I mean, with a poor score function, relevant algorithms are useless. How to build a good score function? You will need to compute this commuter function. But this commuter function, in order to compute it, you need to have a lot of data. So you would need to run the relevant algorithm. And so it's just like what was explained this morning by Tony. One needs one algorithm to improve the algorithm efficiency. So you want to use an adaptive strategy. And so the examples were given this morning. So it's just like in the case of the Wang-Landau algorithm or the multi-canonical methods or the adaptive importance sampling methods and so on and so forth. And so the point, we want to implement this this coupling and this iterative algorithm, where from the data, using machine learning, we compute the optimal score function, which is called the commuter function. It's actually exactly the same thing as the classification problem as I was discussing previously. And then from this, we will use it for running the relevant algorithm to produce more data. And we expect that doing this recursively will progressively improve both the machine learning and the amount of data we have in order to study the extreme heat wave. So we did that, for instance, in 2016 in using the Giardina-Khurshad algorithm. But this was for a very simple problem in dimension 1. So then the learning part was very easy. So I will skip this. So let me just define the commuter function. So if you start from X, you can either go to the set A or to the set B, like the blue and red trajectory. So the commuter function is just the probability that you go to B before going to A. So it's the probability starting from X that tau B is lower than tau A, where tau B is the first heating time of the set B, and tau A is the first heating time of the set A. So as you can see, it is just the same as the probability to have an heat wave, for instance, in the application before, rather than falling down to the typical fluctuation of the system. So I just give you this picture to show you an example. Here you have a simple gradient dynamics, an overdamped Langevin dynamics with a potential V. The isolines of the potential V are plotted here. So you have two attractors here, A and B. And here you have a third metastable state. And then it's not always easy to very well compute the transition probability because you have two paths, one through here and one through there. And then an algorithm that uses the AMS or another kinds of biasing might have difficulty to give a good quantitative result. So here you have the commuter function, which is just the probability to ending in A, to ending in B before ending in A. So you see its value is nearly 1 here in the attractor. It's nearly, so it's the other way around. It's nearly 0 here near the attractor A, nearly 1 nearly the attractor B, and it has an intermediate value elsewhere. And so now I want to describe another way to do the machine learning. And so the way I have shown you before is the approach 1, which is a direct learning. for instance, using a CNN as I have done before. Now you want to use an approach 2, which is first learning a Markov chain from the data, and then computing the commuter function from this Markov chain. And so what we have done is to use what is called the analog Markov chain. It means that for any state xn that has been observed, we look at the k nearest neighbor of xn in the data, and we look at the transitions that were observed in the data. We want to compute the transition probability to go from xn to somewhere else. And then we associate it to, for the transition probability to xn, the probability that corresponds to this arrow. So if xm is one of the image of the nearest neighbors of xn, then we take this probability to be 1 over k and 0 over y. And so it's a way to have something like a Markov state model, but without geometry. We don't need a geometry. And so it's, we don't need to coarse grain the phase space. So possibly we can use this in large dimension. And once we have this, we can compute, I mean, there is a characterization of the commuter function. We have a linear problem to solve, and then we can estimate from this the commuter function. Sorry, I am a bit too fast, but you can see here the coupling. I will describe just the second plot here. So you see here on this axis the data set length measured in numbers of transitions that was observed in the data set. Using the data set, we learn the commuter function. Using the learned commuter function, we use the AMS algorithm. And here you can see the estimation of the transition probability. And so you can see here that we are doing, the black curve is the reality that for this case was computed numerically. And the green dots are the one using this learned commuter function. And the other lines, the blue and the red lines, are the one using user-defined commuter function. And so it's just a way to show that, at least for this case, our coupling of machine learning with the AMS algorithm is very efficient. So we have not yet made this coupling for climate models, but this is what we are working on currently. I mean, coupling the different way to make the learning with the relevant algorithm to have this feedback loop and to improve the data. So I just give you the conclusion for this part. So we can learn commuter function from dynamical data set, either using the definition, but also by first learning an approximate Markov dynamics. So this is called the analog Markov chain. So it does not require an impossible discretization of phase space, and it can be used with any kinds of dynamical data, including short trajectory. So it's really versatile. So we have used this for chaotic dynamics up to dimension 6, and we want to use it for climate data. And so using this approach is much more efficient than using user-defined score function with the AMS relevant algorithm. So I want to just to make an announcement about some GDR. GDR means Groupement de Recherche. It's a French organization in order to gather people in the French community that want to work in identifying and working on key theoretical issues that need to be solved for improving the quantitative prediction in climate science. So it's a consortium that gathers climate scientists, mathematicians, physicists, computer scientists, statistical physics, and people from data science. And I guess machine learning will play a big role for many of the key questions we will address in this new GDR. So I let you with the conclusion, which are the conclusion of the different parts of my talk. Thank you for your attention.